Call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. Not to Imani. To her daughter. Naomi's voice on the phone was barely recognizable, wet, shaking, cut into pieces. Mom, there's a man outside. He's been standing there for 40 minutes. He's not moving. He's looking at the window. At Micah's room. Imani was already pulling on her coat before Naomi finished the sentence. She was 60 years old. She had bad knees. She hadn't thrown a punch since 1987 and lost that one. None of that mattered, because the man standing in the dark below her daughter's window wasn't lost, wasn't drunk, wasn't confused. He was sent. And somewhere in the back of Imani Whitaker's chest, something ancient and furious woke up and said, "Not my grandson. Not tonight, not ever. If this story moved something in you, stay with us. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss what comes next." These are the stories that remind us we are never too old, never too broken, never too far from the moment that changes everything. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city, what country are you watching from tonight? I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The debit card made a sound, not a loud sound, just a small mechanical beep, the kind a machine makes when it's politely telling you no. But in a Korean supermarket at 7:15 on a freezing November evening, with a line of 4 people behind her and a cashier who was maybe 22 years old and clearly exhausted and trying very hard not to make eye contact, that little beep was the loudest thing Imani Whitaker had ever heard in her life. She stood there for a second, just 1 second, the way a person does when their brain refuses to process what just happened. "I'm sorry," the cashier said in careful English. It declined. I know, Imani kept her voice flat, controlled. The voice she'd used when the hospital called about Malcolm, when the bank sent the letter after, when she'd sat across from a loan officer in Atlanta who looked at her file and didn't quite meet her eyes. She had a whole collection of voices she used when things fell apart in public. This was the steadiest one. "Let me try again." She tried again. The machine beeped. The woman directly behind her, late 40s, expensive coat, grocery basket loaded with imported cheese and good wine shifted her weight. Not dramatically, just enough. The small, particular shift of a person who has decided someone else is wasting her time. Imani felt it like a hand on her back. "Ma'am," the cashier said, quieter now. More careful. "Do you want to maybe take some things off?" She looked at her groceries. Rice, eggs, a small bunch of spinach. 2 cans of mackerel because they were on sale. Ginger. A single sweet potato. She thought about Naomi's refrigerator, which had been looking bare for the last week. She thought about her son-in-law Dong Wook, who hadn't been sleeping, who'd been leaving the apartment early and coming back late with that particular look men get when they're carrying something they can't figure out how to put down. She thought about Micah, 18 months old, gap-toothed, currently asleep in his crib, who went through food the way small hurricanes go through Florida. She pulled the rice off the belt, then the sweet potato, then the spinach, because the eggs were cheaper and more practical, and you had to think practically. You had to. She kept the bread, the mackerel, the eggs. The cashier put everything else to the side without a word, which was a mercy, and the machine accepted the new total. And Imani picked up her 2 plastic bags and walked out of that store with her back straight, and her face completely empty, and her fingers curled so tight around the handles that the plastic cut thin, white lines into her palms. She made it to the sidewalk. She made it past the entrance, past the little cluster of people waiting to go in, past the flower stand where someone was buying roses in November for reasons Imani couldn't begin to imagine. She made it to the bus stop, and then she just stopped. The cold hit her properly for the first time, the real Seoul cold, which was not the same kind of cold she'd grown up with in Alabama or lived through in Atlanta. This cold had intention, came off the Han River and moved through the streets like it had somewhere to be and didn't particularly care what was in the way. Imani set down her bags. She pressed her fingers against her mouth. She did not cry. She hadn't cried in public since Malcolm's funeral, and she hadn't cried much even then, because there had been so much to manage: flowers, food, Naomi flying in from Seoul, her two older kids driving up from Florida, her mother-in-law, who was 81 and shouldn't have had to bury her son. Imani had moved through those 3 days like a machine. Efficient, necessary, useful. She'd cried later, by herself, at 3 in the morning in the kitchen, with the lights off and a glass of water she never drank. She wasn't going to cry now, but her eyes watered anyway. The cold did that. That's what she told herself. Across the street, inside a black sedan that probably cost more than her late husband's entire life insurance payout, a man was watching her. CEO Kang-hyun was not in the habit of watching strangers cry at bus stops. He was 57 years old. He had a driver, a security detail, and a schedule that had been built by other people for most of his adult life. He had, at various points in the last 3 decades, negotiated with men who would have killed him for the right sum of money. He had buried his father, a man he had deeply complicated feelings about, which was the most honest way to put it, and then inherited everything that man had built, including the parts that couldn't be mentioned in polite company. He had buried his wife 9 years after that, and that was a different kind of grief entirely. The kind that doesn't announce itself as grief, but instead shows up as silence, as a particular stillness that never fully goes away. He was not soft. He would not have described himself that way, and neither would anyone who knew him. But he told his driver to stop. He wasn't entirely sure why. He had a dinner meeting in 40 minutes. He had 3 phone calls to return and a document that needed his signature before midnight. He had absolutely no rational reason to get out of a warm car in November to approach a stranger at a bus stop. He got out anyway. She heard him coming. He could tell by the way her shoulders shifted. That particular tension of a woman alone at night, registering a man's footsteps, and by the time he reached her, she had already arranged her face into something neutral and self-contained. She was, he noticed, very good at that. "You don't have to be embarrassed," he said, in English, because she was clearly not Korean. "It's cold. Your eyes are watering." She looked at him. He was prepared to be told to mind his business. He probably deserved it. Instead, she said, "That's a very polite lie." Her voice was low. Southern, he thought, though he wasn't expert enough in American regional accents, to be sure. It had a particular weight to it, not heaviness exactly, but density. The voice of someone who had said difficult things out loud many times and gotten through them. He offered his handkerchief. A real one his mother had spent the first 20 years of his life training him to carry one, and that particular habit had outlasted almost everything else she'd tried to instill in him. She looked at it for a moment. Then she took it. "Seo Kang-hyun," he said. "Imani Whitaker." She didn't elaborate. Neither did he. "I was just going to catch the bus. There's a restaurant," he said, gesturing vaguely down the block, "that has very good jjigae. It's not far. You look like you haven't eaten." She looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between skepticism and exhaustion, the look of a woman who has heard many pitches in her life and has gotten very good at identifying the ones that aren't what they claim to be. "I don't know you," she said. No, he agreed with that completely. "But it's cold, and that restaurant is warm, and I haven't had dinner either, and I find I don't particularly want to eat alone tonight." He paused. "You can leave whenever you want. I won't follow you." Something in her face shifted. Not softened, exactly. It was more like a calculation being completed. "Fine," she said, "but I'm paying for my own." She couldn't pay for her own. They both knew that, given what had just happened, 20 feet away inside that supermarket. But he didn't say so, and she didn't explain, and they walked down the block together in the cold, like two people who were maybe, possibly, taking a small and cautious chance. The restaurant was the size of a large closet. 8 tables. No music. A television in the corner showing a soccer match with the volume low. The owner, a woman in her 60s who clearly recognized Kang-hyun, seated them without ceremony and brought food without being asked. This was apparently just what happened when you came here regularly. Imani gathered and then disappeared back into the kitchen. They ate. For the first several minutes, that was simply what they did. The stew was extraordinary pork, tofu, kimchi, something Imani couldn't identify but wanted more of. And she was in fact hungry. had been hungry for most of the day because she'd given Micah the last of the good food this morning and hadn't had time or money to replace it before this particular evening's disaster. She didn't explain any of this. "You're visiting family?" Kang-hyun asked. He poured her tea without asking. It was either presumptuous or considerate, and she hadn't decided which yet. "My daughter. She married a Korean man." Imani wrapped both hands around the cup. "My son-in-law, Dong-wook. They have a baby." "How old?" 18 months. "His name is Micah." She found herself smiling despite everything. Micah had a way of doing that, entering conversations even when he wasn't there. He thinks the cat that lives downstairs is personally responsible for everything wrong in his life. Every morning he points at it and just yells. Kang-hyun laughed. It was a real laugh, the involuntary kind, and it changed his face, completely softened the edges of it, made him look less like a man who spent his life making decisions, and more like a regular person who had just heard something genuinely funny. "He sounds like my son at that age," he said. Jun-suk yelled at everything. The refrigerator, the vacuum, me frequently. He considered this. Still me occasionally. "How old is he now?" 32. "He manages part of the business. He's very competent." A slight pause. "We are still working on the part where he remembers I am his father, and not an obstacle." Imani raised an eyebrow. "Oldest? Only child." She drank her tea. "They're a particular kind of complicated only children. Mine's the youngest, Naomi. She moved here 8 years ago, and sometimes I think she moved to a different planet." She said it without bitterness, which had taken her years to achieve. "I'm still learning the gravity." Kang-hyun watched her for a moment. "You said your daughter married. Your son-in-law's name is Lee Dong-wook? You know him?" The question came out faster than she intended. Something moved through his expression, not recognition exactly, but something that landed adjacent to it, something that arrived, and then was carefully, deliberately put away. "It's a common name," he said. "I don't think so." Imani filed that away. She wasn't sure why. They talked about other things after that, easier things. The kind of conversation two strangers have when they're testing the edges of each other without wanting to admit that's what they're doing. He asked about Alabama, and she described it with the complex, layered affection of someone who left a place and still carries it. She asked about Seoul, and he described it the way people describe cities they've grown up inside, not romantically, but intimately, with specific grievances and specific affections all tangled up together. At some point she mentioned Malcolm, not deliberately. It slipped out the way things do when you've been carrying them long enough that you forget they're not invisible to everyone else. She said something about her late husband's reaction to cold weather, which had been theatrical and vocal and entirely disproportionate, and how she used to tease him about it every winter for 34 years. And then she said late husband, and the table went briefly quiet. "I'm sorry," Kang-hyun said. 2 years ago." She set down her cup. "He had a heart attack. 40 minutes. Gone." She'd said it this way many times now, clean, factual, without excessive decoration, and it still didn't feel like enough words. It never felt like enough words. He was the only man I ever expected to love. Kang-hyun was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My wife died 15 years ago. Cancer. She was 51. He looked at the table. "I still reach for her side of the bed sometimes. In the morning. Before I'm fully awake." He said it simply, without any particular attempt to make it moving, which was maybe why it was. Imani looked at him, this man in his expensive coat in this tiny restaurant, who had gotten out of a warm car because he saw a stranger cry at a bus stop, who carried handkerchiefs, who laughed at an 18-month-old yelling at a cat. "Yeah," she said softly. "I know that feeling," the soccer match murmured in the corner. Outside, Seoul moved in the dark. Two widowed people sat across a small table and understood each other in a way that required very little explanation, which was, Imani thought, its own kind of remarkable. She didn't know it yet, but she'd already walked into the story that was going to change the rest of her life. She didn't know that Seo Kang-hyun's polite hesitation when she mentioned Dong-wook's name meant exactly what she'd suspected it might. She didn't know that the word chairman attached to his name meant things she couldn't quite imagine yet. She didn't know that a man named Jang Tae-suk had already written her son-in-law's name on a list. A sound like green wood splitting, or that a clock was already running on a debt that Dong-wook had taken on in desperation 18 months ago, when Micah was born with his heart doing something it shouldn't have been doing, and the bills arrived faster than any honest salary could keep up with. She didn't know any of that. What she knew was that she walked home that night with a full stomach and a card for a phone number she hadn't asked for, and that Kang-hyun had paid for dinner without making her feel managed or condescended to. A sound like green wood splitting, and that when she finally settled into the spare room at Naomi's apartment and looked at the ceiling in the dark, she realized she hadn't thought about Malcolm's empty side of the bed for almost 3 hours. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. She put the card on the nightstand. She didn't throw it away. Micah woke up at 2 in the morning wanting water and a very specific stuffed elephant that had rolled under the crib. Imani got up and found the elephant and sat with him in the rocking chair until he went back to sleep. His heavy, warm weight against her chest. His breath slowing and deepening the way baby's breath does when they finally decide the world is safe again. She thought about what Kang-hyun had said about reaching for his wife's side of the bed. She thought about how it takes a long time to stop expecting someone who is not coming back. She thought about how some people keep waiting anyway, not because they're foolish, because the alternative, deciding not to wait, requires a kind of bravery that grief doesn't always leave room for. Micah snored very softly against her collarbone. 3 days later, she called the number on the card. They met for coffee, then a walk along the river, which was freezing. But somehow neither of them suggested cutting it short. Then dinner again at a different restaurant, one with tables slightly larger than the first. Phone calls became a thing that happened naturally, not every night, but often enough that she started noticing when they didn't. He was, she discovered, a careful person. He thought before he spoke. He listened in a way most people didn't, the real kind of listening, where someone is actually tracking what you're saying rather than waiting for their turn. He was also, she suspected, a person who had learned to keep large portions of himself behind a door that stayed closed, and she recognized that because she had a similar door herself. She didn't push on his. He didn't push on hers. They were 60 years old. They'd both figured out by now that you can know someone without knowing everything about them. You can trust someone without being naive. You can let someone matter to you without catastrophizing about what it means. Or so she told herself. The black sedan she started noticing outside the apartment building, she told herself was probably a coincidence. The second time she saw it, same car, same position, across the street from Naomi's building at 7 in the morning, she told herself it was a neighbor. The third time she didn't say anything to herself about it at all. She just noted it and filed it and kept going. She was making rice when the knock came. Naomi was at work. Dong-wook was somewhere. She'd learned not to track his comings and outgoings too carefully because something in his face went stiff when she paid too much attention. Micah was in his playpen with 3 blocks and a conviction that the orange one was a betrayal. The knock was measured, patient, not a delivery person's knock, not a neighbor's knock, something more deliberate than both. She went to the door, but she didn't open it. "Who is it?" A pause. Then a man's voice, speaking Korean first, and when she didn't respond, switching to English that was careful and accented and completely flat. "I am looking for Lee Dong-wook. He's not here." Another pause. She could hear him breathing through the door. Even breathing, not nervous. "Tell him," the man said slowly, "that Chairman Jang has started the clock." And then footsteps retreating down the hall. Imani stood at that door for a long moment. Micah made a frustrated sound behind her. The orange block had apparently committed some final offense. She picked up her phone. She called Kang-hyun. He picked up on the second ring, which was its own kind of answer. He always picked up quickly, she'd noticed that. She told him what the man had said. There was a silence on the line that was different from his usual silences. Not contemplative, compressed, like something under pressure deciding how to release. "Imani," his voice had changed. Not colder, exactly, more contained. All the warmth that had built up over these weeks was still technically there, but it had moved behind something, and what was left in front of it was careful and very precise. Is Micah with you right now? Yes. Are you in the apartment? Yes. Don't open that door again tonight. Don't let anyone in. A pause. I'm coming. She lowered the phone. In his playpen, Micah held up the orange block and looked at her with wide, dark eyes, checking, the way babies check, to see if the world was still all right. Imani looked at her grandson. She didn't know yet what Chairman Jang meant. She didn't know what clock had started or how long it had been running. She didn't know that the careful, quiet man who'd handed her a handkerchief at a bus stop 3 weeks ago had a past that breathed and moved, and occasionally knocked on doors. She would know soon. For now, she just picked up Micah, tucked him against her hip, and waited for headlights in the street below. The orange block fell to the floor. Neither of them noticed. The headlights appeared at 9:47 p.m. Not 1 pair 3. Imani was standing at the window with Micah on her hip when the cars pulled up a black sedan in front, 2 more behind it, all of them moving with that particular kind of coordinated stillness that meant nothing about this was accidental. She watched the doors open, watched the men get out, counted without meaning to. 6, 7, 8, and then Kang-hyun, stepping out of the middle car, his coat collar up against the cold, his face in the streetlight carrying an expression she had never seen on him before. She'd seen him tired. She'd seen him careful. She'd seen him soft, which was maybe the most surprising thing, the way softness kept surfacing in him when he thought no one was particularly paying attention. This was none of those things. This was the face of a man who had just made a decision he couldn't take back and had made it without flinching. She buzzed them up before he knocked. He came in with 2 men, she didn't know, one in his 40s, compact and quiet, who took a position near the door without being asked, one younger, maybe 30, who did a sweep of the apartment in under 90 seconds with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it many times. Kang-hyun didn't explain either of them. He just looked at Imani, then at Micah, then around the apartment with that compressed, measuring attention. You're both all right. It wasn't a question. We're fine. Imani set Micah down in the playpen. Now tell me what's happening. Kang-hyun looked at the door of Naomi's bedroom, which was closed. Is Dong-wook home? Not yet. She checked her phone. No messages from Naomi either. He doesn't always say when he's coming back. Something moved through Kang-hyun's expression at that. Not surprise. Something worse than surprise, the particular grimace of a man who is recognizing a pattern he already knows the shape of. Sit down, he said. I'd rather stand. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. All right, he told her about Jang Tae-suk in pieces, the way you tell someone difficult things when you're not sure. How much they can absorb at once carefully, watching her face, adjusting as he went. Jang ran an illegal lending operation, among other things. Not the only thing he ran, not even the worst thing, but the lending was where he was most dangerous, because lending looked almost legitimate from a distance, and because men in desperate situations borrowed money from him without fully understanding that the interest didn't follow any rules a bank would recognize, that it doubled, that it found ways to multiply itself that weren't in any contract, that the moment you signed, the debt became something that would never fully be paid off, only managed, and the management was something Jang's men handled personally. Dong-wook borrowed money, Imani said. Flat. No question mark. Yes, when Micah was born, a pause. It looks that way. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. Micah was chewing on a block in his playpen, making small, focused sounds, completely unaware. How much? Kang-hyun told her the original figure. Then he told her what it had become. The number was not survivable on a regular salary. Not in any realistic time frame, not without help. How long have you known? She asked. I suspected something when you mentioned Dong-wook's name that first night. He said it without apology, which she appreciated more than she could express in that moment. I had someone look into it the following week. I confirmed it 3 days ago. 3 days. She let that sit for a second. You didn't tell me. No. Why? He was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the question. She could tell the difference by now between him thinking and him evading. He was thinking. Because I didn't know yet what I was going to do about it, he finally said. And I didn't want to frighten you before I had something useful to offer. She wanted to be angry about that. She tried. The anger was there. She could feel the shape of it. But it kept running up against the fact that he had gotten out of a warm car in November because she was crying at a bus stop. That he had carried the information and not used it. That he had come tonight with 8 men and 3 cars the moment she called. She filed the anger away for later. She might need it. You said you suspected, she said. Why? What do you know about Jang? This was the part she'd felt coming since he walked through the door. The part that had been living in the pauses of their conversations. In that small hesitation the first night when she said Dong-wook's name. She watched him take a breath, watched him decide. Jang and I have a history, he said. We established a truce some years ago. He stays out of my business. I stay out of his. He looked at her directly. What I haven't told you is what my business actually is. What it was. Imani waited, he told her. She didn't fall apart. He'd half expected her to, not because she was fragile. He'd known from the second week that she was one of the least fragile people he'd ever met, but because this was a particular kind of information. The kind that restructures everything around it. The kind that makes you reassess every conversation, every meal, every quiet evening walk you've shared with someone. Sees. She stood in her daughter's kitchen and she listened. And when he finished, she was quiet for long enough that the younger of his 2 men shifted his weight near the window. So when you said you were in business, she said, I run legitimate companies now. I have for years. He held her gaze. What I inherited from my father was not entirely legitimate. I have spent a significant portion of my adult life dismantling it. A pause. There are pieces still in existence that I haven't yet been able to reach. Jang is one of those pieces. Jang grew in the space I left behind. When I began pulling back, he moved in. His jaw was tight. That's partly on me. Imani was quiet for another moment. She looked at Micah, who had abandoned the blocks, and was now pulling himself up on the edge of the playpen, with the focused determination of someone who has decided walking is a thing that should happen immediately. Can you protect my daughter and grandson? She asked. The directness of it caught him. He hadn't expected the conversation to arrive there so fast. Yes. Can you fix the debt, make it go away? I believe so. She looked at him. Something settled in her face. Not relief wasn't the right word. It was more like a decision being executed. Then fix it. He started making calls before he left the apartment. Imani and I sat at the kitchen table and listened to him speak Korean. In the next room, low, precise, stripped of everything unnecessary, and she understood none of the words and all of the tone. This was not the man who'd poured her tea in a tiny restaurant and laughed about his son. This was whoever that man had spent 30 years becoming, before he'd decided to try to become someone else. She found she wasn't afraid of it. She was, however, very tired. The front door opened at 11:15. Dong-wook came in looking like a man who'd been wearing his own guilt as a coat. For so long he'd forgotten it wasn't skin. He was 36, slim, with a particular hollowness around the eyes of someone not sleeping enough and eating less. He stopped in the entrance when he saw Kang-hyun's man near the window. Then he saw Kang-hyun. The color left his face completely. Sit down, Dong-wook, Imani said from the kitchen table. He sat. Not because she'd told him to, she could see that wasn't quite it. He sat because his legs made the decision before his brain could override them. Kang-hyun came out of the hallway and stood in the center of the room and looked at his son-in-law with an expression that was not cruel and not kind, and was somehow worse than either. Tell me, Kang-hyun said simply. And Dong-wook, who had been holding this alone for 18 months, told them. It came out badly, not in order, not clean, with long pauses, where he stared at his own hands and shorter ones where his voice went tight and nearly broke. When Micah was born, there were complications they hadn't anticipated. Specialist. 2 surgeries in the first 6 weeks. The bills arrived before the insurance sorted itself out. and the insurance sorted itself out slowly. And Dong-wook's salary was good, but not that good. And he had borrowed from his parents first, and from his brother, and then from a colleague who knew someone who knew someone. And by the time he understood who that someone was, the money was already spent, and Micah was breathing properly, and the debt was already doing what Jang's debts did. "Why didn't you tell Naomi?" Imani asked. He looked at his hands. She was exhausted. Micah wasn't sleeping. She wasn't sleeping. "I thought I could handle it." 18 months, Imani said. "That's a long time to handle something by yourself." "I know," he said it quietly. "I know that." She wanted to be angry at him too. She had more anger available tonight than she usually kept in stock. But she looked at this young man who had watched her grandson get cut open on a table when he was 6 weeks old, and had apparently decided in that moment that he would carry whatever he needed to carry in order to keep that from happening again. And the anger kept bending sideways into something more complicated. Kang-hyun said, "How many people know you borrowed from Jang's operation?" "Just whoever he told. I don't know who that is." "Did you sign anything with your name on it?" "Yes." Kang-hyun's jaw moved. He nodded once, the nod of a man recalculating. "All right." He looked at Imani. "I need to make more calls. This will take a few days. Take the time you need," she said. He started to move toward the hallway, then stopped. He looked back at her, just a look, not long, but direct in a way that carried more than he probably intended. Then he kept moving. Imani looked at Dong-wook across the table. "You're going to tell Naomi," she said. "Tomorrow." "All of it." He nodded. "And when she's done being furious, and she will be furious, I know, my child, you're going to let her be furious, and you're going to stand there and not defend yourself, because there isn't a defense. You understand me?" "Yes, Mom." He'd called her that 3 times since she arrived in Seoul. It still surprised her every time. Naomi came home at midnight to find her mother sitting at the kitchen table, her husband silent on the couch, and 2 men she didn't know positioned near the door and window like furniture that had opinions. She stood in the entrance for a long moment, her eyes moving from her mother to Dong-wook to the strange men to the sound of someone speaking Korean on the phone in the hallway. "Mom," she said carefully, "what's happening? Come sit down, baby." Naomi Whitaker Lee was 34 years old, and she had her father Malcolm's eyes and her mother's jaw, and she was not, as it turned out, a woman who did anything quietly when she was angry. She was not quiet. The next 4 days were bad in the way that necessary things are sometimes bad, the surgery kind of bad, where you understand it's the right thing, while also understanding that right doesn't mean easy. Kang-hyun worked levers Imani see from where she stood. There were phone calls. There were meetings she wasn't part of. There were moments when he came to pick her up for dinner and was 20 minutes late and didn't apologize, which he always did when he was late, and she understood that the lateness meant something had gone wrong and had been fixed. And the not apologizing meant he was still somewhere inside the fix. She didn't press. She was good at reading which silences needed filling and which ones needed to be left alone. On the 3rd day, he came to the apartment in the afternoon, and when she let him in, she saw immediately that something had shifted, not resolved, but moved. Like weight redistributed. "Jang's people have agreed to a meeting," he said. "That's good. It means they're willing to talk, which means they're not certain they can win." He sat down on the couch, actually sat, which he didn't usually do at the apartment. He usually stood, always ready to move. "I leveraged some financial pressure, called in some obligations people owed me. Made it clear that Jang's exposure in certain areas of his business would become significantly more visible if this continued. You threatened him. I presented him with an accurate picture of his situation." The corner of his mouth moved. With certain emphases, Imani sat down across from him. "And the debt will be restructured. Just most of it will disappear in the accounting. Dong-wook will owe a small, manageable amount to a legitimate creditor I control, which he can pay off in 2 years without destroying his family." He paused. "Should have come to me when it started. I would have—" He stopped. "You didn't know her then," Imani said. He looked at her. "No, I didn't. Something passed between them that neither of them named. She was getting used to those unnamed things, accumulating them, understanding that they were their own kind of conversation. There's a problem, he said. I know. He looked at her steadily. You know, I know you well enough to know that when you sit down without being asked, something's wrong. She folded her hands in her lap. Tell me, he told her about the truce. The actual details of it, what he'd agreed to, what Jang had agreed to, and what breaking it meant. Not legally. Legally, Kang-hyun was technically insulated. But in the world where these agreements operated, breaking a truce wasn't just a business decision. It was a statement, and statements required responses. The underground now knows I intervened, he said. Which means they know you exist. They know you matter to me, he said, the last part flatly, as a fact, with none of the weight it would have had in a different conversation. In that world, anything anyone a man cares about becomes leverage. Imani absorbed this. So by protecting my family, she said slowly, you've put us in a different kind of danger. Yes. He didn't soften it. I'm sorry. Did you know this would happen when you made the calls? A long pause. I knew it was possible. She nodded slowly. She thought about asking him if he would have done it differently, knowing the outcome. She decided she didn't need to ask. She already knew. What do we do? She asked. I need to be more careful. My security around your family will increase. Discreetly, Naomi shouldn't feel like she's living in a facility. He looked at his hands. And I need to make some decisions about the pieces of my father's world that I still haven't shut down. I've been deliberate about the timing. There are relationships, obligation. You've been slow, she said. He looked up. You've been slow about it, she said. Not unkind, just accurate. And now slow has caught up with you. His jaw tightened, then released. Yes. Jun-suk arrived on Saturday. Imani hadn't been told he was coming. She suspected Kang-hyun hadn't known either. From the look on the older man's face when his son walked through the door of the apartment, a compound expression that involved surprise and something that resembled wariness, which was not the face a father should make when his child walks in, but which, she understood immediately, was the face of a man who knew a confrontation was about to happen and couldn't decide if this was the right time for it. There was never a right time for it. That was the thing about necessary confrontations. Seo Jun-suk was his father's height, but built lighter. With his mother's face and his cheekbones, this Imani knew because she'd seen the photograph Kang-hyun kept on his phone. The one of his wife holding a very small Jun-suk, both of them squinting into afternoon sun. He came in wearing a dark jacket, looked at Imani with the particular calibrated blankness of someone who has already decided to be suspicious, but doesn't want to seem emotional about it, and said something in Korean to his father. Kang-hyun responded. His tone was careful. Whatever he said, Jun-suk's expression didn't change. Then Jun-suk switched to English. Mrs. Whitaker, he said. My father has told me about you. He's mentioned you too, Imani said. Sit down. I'll make coffee. She didn't ask whether he wanted coffee. She'd raised 3 children. She knew that giving someone a task, accept the coffee, decline the coffee, gave them something to do with the discomfort. And sometimes that was all you needed to begin. Jun-suk sat. He watched her move around the kitchen with the focused attention of someone building a case file. How long have you been in Seoul? He asked. 6 weeks. And you met my father 3 weeks ago. At a bus stop. At a bus stop. She set the coffee in front of him. I know how that sounds. It sounds fast, he said. It was fast. She sat down across from him. Most things that matter don't wait for a convenient schedule. His eyes were sharp. He had his father's habit of listening without responding immediately, that careful space before speaking. But where Kang-hyun used the space to consider, Jun-suk used it to assess. She could almost see him working through it. Who are you? What do you want? How much damage can you do? My father is a cautious man, Jun-suk said. He doesn't let people in quickly. I know that too. So, he wrapped his hands around the mug. What is it that he sees? She looked at him, not warmly, exactly, but without defensiveness. I'm not going to answer that question, she said, because it's not really what you're asking. He waited. What you're actually asking is whether I'm going to hurt him, she said. And I can't answer that either, because nobody can guarantee that. All I can tell you is that I'm not trying to, and that I understand he's complicated, and I'm staying anyway. Jun-suk looked at her for a long moment. His expression hadn't changed. She suspected he'd practiced keeping it still. He told you about his business, Jun-suk said. Yes. Everything? Enough. He glanced toward the hallway where Kang-hyun had retreated to take a call. Lowered his voice slightly. He's been trying to get out of it for years. The legitimate side that's real, that's his. But there are parts that don't just, he stopped. Recalibrated. They don't just dissolve because you want them to. I know, she said. And you're still here. I'm still here. The hallway door opened, and Micah came toddling out. He'd been asleep earlier, and had apparently decided sleeping. Was finished making his particular sound that was somewhere between a word and an announcement. He moved with the aggressive confidence of someone who has recently discovered legs and considers them a personal achievement. He made a beeline for Jun-suk. Imani watched Jun-suk see him coming. Watched something shift in the younger man's carefully maintained expression, not disappear exactly, but step back, make room for something more instinctive. Micah grabbed Jun-suk's pants leg and looked up at him with complete certainty. Jun-suk looked down at him. He picked him up. Not gracefully, he held him out slightly, like a man holding something he wasn't sure of, but he held him. Micah grabbed a fistful of his jacket and made a sound of deep satisfaction and leaned his heavy little head against Jun-suk's shoulder as though this had always been the plan. Jun-suk sat very still. Imani said nothing. She got up and refilled her own coffee and stood at the counter and watched Jun-suk Seo, 32 years old, only child of a complicated man, sitting in a stranger's apartment with a baby falling asleep against his collar. And she watched something in his face go quiet, in a way it hadn't been since he walked through the door. When Kang-hyun came back from the hallway, he stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at his son. Jun-suk looked up at him, then at Imani. He didn't say anything. Neither did she, but something had been negotiated. The bruise appeared on a Wednesday. She saw it the moment Kang-hyun walked in the left side of his jaw, purpling at the edge, the kind of mark that comes from a specific and intentional impact rather than an accident. He didn't try to conceal it. He didn't mention it. She waited until he'd sat down, until the usual preliminary conversation had settled into silence, and then she said, "Who?" Not a question. He looked at her. One of Jang's lieutenants. A message. "Jang hit you. Jang's people hit someone who works for me." His voice was very level. "And then delivered a message to my car." "What message?" He set his phone face down on the table. A small gesture, but she noticed it the way you put something down when you don't want to be interrupted by it. "The truce is over. He's decided that my intervention with Dong-wook's debt was a violation he can't absorb. That if he lets it stand, others will see it as weakness." And Kang-hyun was quiet for a moment. "His men believe you're carrying evidence. Documents I've collected about Jang's operation that I intend to use against him." Imani stared at him. "Do I know anything that's evidence?" "No. But they believe I do." "Yes." He looked at her steadily. "Which makes you a target." She sat with that, turned it over. Outside, Seoul moved in the dark the way it always did, indifferent, lit, enormous. "How serious?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. When someone like Kang-hyun doesn't answer immediately, Imani had learned, the answer is serious. "He's made a decision," Kang-hyun said finally. "He's not willing to negotiate anymore. He wants to demonstrate that I can be pressured." His jaw was tight. "The most direct way to pressure me is through the people I care about." Imani thought about the black sedan outside Naomi's building, about the measured knock on the door, about the man who had said Chairman Jang has started the clock in that flat, patient voice. She thought about Micah, asleep in his crib 20 feet away. "Tell me what you need to do," she said. "I need to move faster than I planned." He looked at his hands. "Pieces of my father's organization that I've been—" He stopped. Looked up at her. "That I've been slow about." She recognized her own words. "I need to dismantle them," he said. "Completely. Not gradually. Not carefully. All of it, as fast as I can do it without making it look like panic." He exhaled. "Because if I don't, Jang will keep finding leverage." And I have a pause, something moving behind his eyes. "I have people in my life, now that I am not willing to offer as leverage." Imani held his gaze for a long moment. She understood what he was saying. She understood what it cost him to say it, not the words, but what the words represented. 15 years of operating alone. 15 years of keeping everything at a manageable distance because distance was the only protection he knew how to guarantee. She had walked through that distance, apparently. She hadn't meant to. She wasn't entirely sure how it had happened. Then do it, she said. His phone screen lit up, face down on the table. He turned it over, looked at it. She watched his face change, not dramatically, not the way faces change in movies, but the way faces change in real life, which is smaller and more terrible. Compression, an inward collapse of something that had been holding. He looked up at her. Men are moving, he said. Where? He was already standing, already reaching for his phone with one hand and his coat with the other. Toward this building. And Imani Whitaker, 60 years old, widow, grandmother, woman who had survived poverty and grief, 34 years of a marriage that was real enough to leave a permanent absence in its wake, stood up from that table and felt something cold and clear settle through her like the first breath after a long time underwater. She thought, Naomi, Micah. The service exit on the building's east side that she'd noted her second week here because she'd always been the kind of person who noted exits. She thought, these men are coming for someone they believe has evidence. She thought, if they find the apartment empty, they'll keep looking. But if they believe someone is still inside, Kang-hyun, she said. He was already on the phone, speaking Korean, moving toward the door. Kang-hyun, louder. He stopped, looked at her. Get Naomi and Dong-wook and Micah out the back, she said. Right now. I'll get them ready. She held his gaze. And then you go. You do what you need to do. I'll handle this end. He stared at her. You said you were coming, she said. So come, but get there fast, because I am not going to be afraid in my daughter's kitchen, and I am not going to run, and the only way this works is if you trust me to know what I can handle. Something moved through his face that she didn't have a name for yet. Imani, go, she said. He went. She turned and walked to Naomi's bedroom door and knocked twice, sharp and deliberate, because there was no time left for anything soft. Naomi didn't ask questions. That was the thing that broke Imani's heart a little, the way her daughter came out of that bedroom, already moving, already reading the room, already pulling on shoes and grabbing Micah's coat from the hook by the door, with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had understood on some cellular level that something was wrong long before tonight. 8 years in Seoul had done that to her, maybe. Or marriage to a man carrying a secret that Heavy had done it. Either way, Naomi Whitaker Lee did not stand in the hallway, asking why. She looked at her mother once. One look, direct and searching. Imani nodded. Naomi went to get Micah. Dong-wook was already in the hallway, his face the particular gray of a man watching the consequences of his own choices arrive in real time. He looked at Imani with something that wasn't quite shame and wasn't quite terror but lived in the neighborhood of both. The service exit, Imani said quietly. East side of the building. Stairs down to the parking structure. There's a door at the bottom that opens to the side street. She'd walked it twice in the last week after the first sedan appeared outside. Old habit. Malcolm used to tease her about it, always scoping the exits. Imani, you planning a heist? And she'd always said somebody in this family needed to. Where are we going? Dong-wook asked. Kang-hyun has people waiting. Someone will meet you at the side street. She didn't know this for certain. But she knew Kang-hyun, and she knew that he'd had 8 men, with 3 cars, on the night of one phone call. And she knew that whatever he was doing right now involved moving faster than he'd ever planned. Someone would be there. Naomi came back with Micah bundled against her chest, half asleep, his face smooshed into her shoulder with the absolute boneless trust of a child who has decided the adults have it handled. The sight of him, that small, warm, entirely unaware weight, did something to Imani's sternum that she didn't have time to feel properly. Mom, Naomi's voice was low. What about you? I'm staying. The silence that followed was approximately 3 seconds long and contained an entire argument. They're coming for something they think I have, Imani said, before Naomi could start. If the apartment's empty when they get here, they'll follow. They need to believe someone's still inside. She kept her voice level. Practical. The same voice she'd used when she told her kids about Malcolm. Your father is gone, and we are going to be okay. And I need you to listen to me right now. I'll be fine. I'm not going to open the door. I'm just going to be visible. Mom Naomi. She put both hands on her daughter's face. Micah made a small sound between them. I have been keeping this family together since before you were born. I know what I'm doing. She looked at her daughter Malcolm's eyes, her jaw, her own particular stubbornness reflected back at her, and felt the specific love that comes from recognizing yourself in someone and being proud of it. Go, Naomi went. Dong-wook followed. At the door he stopped and turned back, and for a moment he looked like he was going to say something, some form of apology or explanation, or both. And Imani shook her head once, and he nodded, and he went. The service door closed behind them. The apartment went quiet. Imani stood in her daughter's kitchen and breathed. She turned on the kitchen light, then the living room lamp. She moved to the window and stood where she could be seen from the street below, not directly in front of it, not foolishly, but enough. A shape behind glass, a light on, someone home. Her hands were steady. This surprised her mildly. She'd expected fear to be louder than this. She'd expected the physical vocabulary of it, the shaking, the shallow breathing, the chest that feels like it's been wrapped in something tight. She'd had all of that before, at other crisis points in her life, and she knew the shape of it. What she felt instead was something colder and quieter. Not calm exactly. Clarity, maybe. The thing that happens when there are no more decisions to make. Only execution. She thought about Malcolm. Not in a sad way, not the 3 a.m. kitchen way. Just the way you think about someone who is part of your architecture. Malcolm would have hated this. He would have been furious with her for staying. He also would have understood, because he'd known her for 34 years, and understanding her was something he'd worked at and gotten good at. He would have said, Imani, you are the most stubborn woman alive, and he would have meant it as both a criticism and a compliment. She almost smiled. Her phone buzzed. Kang-hyun, men in building. Stairwell. 3 minutes. Don't move from where you are. She typed back. I know. A pause. Then I'm 12 minutes out. She put the phone in her pocket. She looked around her daughter's apartment, the photographs on the wall. Micah's drawings taped to the refrigerator. The small wooden toy horse on the shelf that Jun-suk had brought last Saturday and pretended was just something he'd had sitting around. The evidence of a life being built by people trying their best with what they had. She thought 12 minutes. She thought, all right. They knocked at 7 minutes. 2 of them, she thought she could hear the weight of them in the hallway, the particular distribution of 2 people positioning themselves on either side of a door. The knock itself was unhurried, patient, the knock of men who were not in a rush because they didn't believe they needed to be. She didn't go to the door. Mrs. Whitaker. The voice through the door was the same flat, English-accented Korean she'd heard once before. Not the same man, different voice, but the same deliberate register. We know you're inside. We saw the light. She said nothing. We're not here to hurt you. We only want to talk. She had been lied to before. She recognized it by the grammar we only want. This won't take long. Just a conversation. The grammar of men who needed you not to be afraid long enough to open the door. I've already called the police, she said loudly enough to carry through the door. A silence. Then you haven't. If you had, you wouldn't have said so. A pause. Open the door, Mrs. Whitaker. We're going to have this conversation either way. Her phone buzzed. Kang-hyun, 8 minutes. She typed back. They're at the door. The response was immediate, and not in English. She assumed it was not something she would want translated. Then, do not open it. I'm moving faster. She put the phone away. The knock came again. Harder this time. Last time I'll ask nicely, the voice said. Imani looked at the door. She thought about what Kang-hyun had told her, that these men believed she was carrying evidence. Documents. A threat to Jang's operation packaged as a woman who'd wandered into the wrong story. She thought about the fact that she was, in actuality, a 60-year-old retired schoolteacher from Atlanta, with bad knees and 2 plastic bags of groceries from 3 weeks ago, and absolutely nothing on her that could threaten anyone. The irony of it was not lost on her. She was still thinking about this when the lock began to move. Not from a key, from something else, a tool, a pick, the practiced manipulation of a mechanism by someone who had done it many times. She watched the handle shift, almost imperceptibly, and felt the particular cold that is not temperature, but is the body's way of recognizing danger before the brain finishes the thought. She backed up, not panicking, controlled, deliberate. She put the kitchen island between herself and the door. She picked up the only thing on the counter that had any weight to it, which was a cast iron pot Naomi had left soaking, and she held it with both hands, and she stood there, and she breathed. The door opened. 2 men, one older, broad across the shoulders, with the flat eyes of someone for whom this was simply work. One younger who saw the pot and whose expression moved briefly, involuntarily, through something that might have been surprise. "Mrs. Whitaker," the older one said. "Put that down." "No," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them moved for a moment that stretched in the specific way of moments when 2 people are deciding. Then the younger man's radio crackled. He pulled it from his belt and listened, and his face changed. The older man turned toward him, and then Imani heard it too from the stairwell, from the hallway, from what sounded like 3 directions simultaneously, a rapid sequence of sounds that resolved, after a confused second, into the organized movement of multiple people arriving with great purpose. The older man said something sharp in Korean. The younger man was already moving toward the window. Kang-hyun's people came through the door 11 seconds later. What happened in the following hour was not clean. Imani had expected clean, or she had expected something legible, a confrontation with clear edges, a resolution with a shape she could follow. What she got instead was a series of overlapping scenes that kept interrupting each other. Kang-hyun arriving, finally, breathing hard in a way she'd never seen him breathe, his people managing the 2 men from Jang with a practiced efficiency that asked no questions and answered none. Naomi, calling from wherever Kang-hyun's men had taken them, her voice high and tight. Micah apparently having woken fully and decided this was an excellent time to be enthusiastic about something. Kang-hyun crossed the apartment to where Imani was standing. She'd set down the pot. Finally, she was certain the situation had resolved in the direction she'd bet on, and he stopped in front of her and looked at her with an expression that had no name she knew, that was made of several things at once. And he said, "You stayed." "I said I would," she said. Looked like he wanted to say something else. He didn't. She looked at the cast iron pot on the counter, thought about the fact that she'd been prepared to hit a man with it, and thought Malcolm would have had a full cardiac event. She almost laughed. She kept it together. "Jang's people," she said. "What happens now?" Kang-hyun's expression shifted back into the mode she thought of as the chairman contained, processing already 3 steps forward. "Now we have a problem bigger than 2 men in an apartment." He turned toward his lead man, the compact one, the one who'd been with him since the first night. Brief exchange in Korean, then back to her. "Jang is making a public move. Coming after you directly entering this building, that's not a negotiating tactic anymore. That's a declaration. Meaning? Meaning he's decided he can afford to be visible. Which means either he has more protection than I thought, or he stopped. Or he looked at her. Or someone has told him that I'm more exposed than he understood. The way he said it. The particular weight of it. Someone on your side," she said. Not a question. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. The next 48 hours moved in a strange, doubled rhythm normal life on the surface. Naomi and Dongkik and Micah at a hotel Kang-hyun had arranged. Amasi staying at a different location with a security detail she'd negotiated down from 4 people to 2, and underneath it, the feeling of something structural giving way. She felt it before she understood it. She understood it on the 2nd day. A sound like green wood splitting when Kang-hyun came to the safe apartment in the afternoon and sat down across from her and looked like a man who had been awake for 36 hours and had spent all of them finding out something he hadn't wanted to know. "Tell me," she said. He'd found the source. His lead man, the compact one. the one who'd been with him for 11 years, who knew the apartment locations and the security rotations, and the timing of every move Kang-hyun had made in the last 3 weeks, had been feeding information to Jang's organization for the last 4 months. Imani sat very still. Why, she asked. Money. His daughter is sick. Medical debt. Kang-hyun's voice was flat, in a way that was not emptiness, but was the opposite of it, so full of something that it had gone past expression. He needed money faster than I pay it. The irony was savage, and neither of them said so. Did he know what Jang would do with the information? Pause. I think he told himself it was just logistics. Schedules, locations. He told himself it wouldn't come to. Kang-hyun stopped. People tell themselves things. Yes, Imani said. They do. She thought about Dong-wook. She thought about 18 months of a man telling himself he could handle it, that it wouldn't come to this, that the debt would stop growing if he just kept working and didn't say anything and gave it time. She thought about how the things we carry alone always eventually find their own way out. What happens to him, she asked. He's been removed from his position. He won't be charged. I won't do that to his family. But he's done. Kang-hyun's jaw worked. 11 years. She could hear it, the specific grief of betrayal, which is different from regular grief because it retroactively contaminates memory. 11 years of dinners and crises and loyalty was real until it wasn't, and now all of it was in question, every moment audited against this one revelation. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't think he wanted it, and she didn't think it would land right. What she did was stay where she was and let him be in the room with it. After a while, he said, the security breach means Jang knows more than I thought. About the documentation I've been building. About the approach I was planning. He looked at his hands. Everything I was going to do carefully, I now have to do differently. How differently? He looked at her. All at once, he said. She didn't understand the full shape of what that meant until 3 days later, when Jun-suk arrived at the safe apartment with a laptop and 3 folders and the look of a man who was furious and about something and was being very professional about not expressing it. He and his father spoke in Korean for 20 minutes in the kitchen while Imani sat in the living room and read a book she was not reading. When they came out, Jun-suk sat down across from her and said, he told you about the plan. The broad strokes. The broad strokes are gone. He opened one of the folders. Jang's organization received specific information about which assets my father was planning to expose first, and in what order. So they've moved those assets, restructured, made them harder to reach. He set a paper down in front of her, without explaining why she thought it was less about informing her, and more that he needed somewhere to put his hands. Everything we built over 8 months, the documentation, the financial mapping, the testimony we had lined up from 3 former associates. Compromised, Imani said. Not all of it, but enough that going forward with the original approach, he stopped. We'd be showing our hand to people who already know what cards we're holding. Kang-hyun was standing near the window. He hadn't moved in a while. A sound like green the way he did. He was looking at the street when he was thinking through something that had no clean solution, cycling through it, looking for the angle that wasn't there. There's something else, Jun-suk said. His voice was different now. Quieter. She noticed him glance at his father, a quick, uncertain look, the look of a son trying to gauge how his father is actually holding up underneath the control. Tell me, Kang-hyun said, without turning from the window. Jang made a move this morning. Jun-suk looked at the folder. He filed. Regulatory complaint against 3 of our subsidiary companies. Fraudulent, but detailed. Whoever helped him prepare it knew our internal structures. He paused. Designed to trigger an investigation that ties up our legal and financial resources for at least 6 months. While we're defending ourselves, he consolidates, rebuilds what we were dismantling. He flipped our strategy, Imani said. Both of them looked at her. He's using your plan against you, she said. You were going to expose him through legal and financial channels. Now he's opening legal and financial channels on you. While you're busy defending the companies, you can't go after his organization. She looked at Kang-hyun's back. He's not running. He's counterattacking. A silence. Jun-suk said very quietly, yes. Kang-hyun turned from the window. His face was, she'd never seen his face quite like this. Not broken, that wasn't the right word. It was the face of a man who had spent 30 years being 3 moves ahead of every problem he'd encountered, and who was now looking at a board where the pieces had been rearranged while he wasn't watching, and the instinct that had always been there, the calculation. The angle was temporarily not responding. It only lasted a moment, but she saw it, and it was terrible. "The witnesses," he said to Jun-suk, "the 3 former associates. 2 have gone quiet. Lawyers advised them. 1 is we're not sure where he is. Find him. We're trying. The financial mapping that isn't compromised, how much is usable?" Jun-suk's expression said, "Not enough." His mouth said, "We can work with it, but not against a defended position. Not with their legal team now engaged." Kang-hyun sat down. In the 34 years, Imani had been navigating life in crises, and the specific exhaustion of being a black woman who was never allowed to be tired. She had developed a reliable instinct for when a situation had tipped from hard into something that required a fundamentally different approach. She felt it now, that particular tipping. "There's more," Jun-suk said. Kang-hyun looked at his son, the regulatory complaint. The timing of it, the specific details. Jun-suk put another paper on the table. "The information Jang used to build it. It's not just what his informant inside our team knew." He paused. "Some of it is older, from our internal restructuring 3 years ago. Documents that were never outside our family office. A silence that was different from the other silences." "The family office," Kang-hyun said. "Yes, that's 6 people. 5. One of them died last year." Imani watched Kang-hyun's face move through something. She couldn't name not a single emotion, but a cascade of them, each one arriving and being absorbed before the next one hit. He looked at the paper Jun-suk had set down. He looked at his son. He looked at the table. "It's not recent," Jun-suk said, and his voice had changed completely, now softer. More careful, the voice of a son who is delivering something painful to his father, with as much care as he can manage. Whoever it is, they've been in contact with Jang's organization for at least 3 years. Maybe longer. 3 years. Imani did the math without meaning to. 3 years meant this predated her. Predated Dongwook's debt. Predated the truce being broken. Predated all of it. 3 years meant this was not a reaction to anything Kang-hyun had done recently. It meant someone had been inside his house, waiting for the right moment. "Do you know who?" she asked Jun-suk. He hesitated. She looked at him. He was looking at his father. "Jun-suk," Kang-hyun said. Very quiet. "Tell me." Jun-suk put the last paper on the table. She didn't know the name on it. She didn't need to. She could read it from the way Kang-hyun picked up the paper. The way his hands were not entirely steady. The way he sat with it for a long time without speaking. "Park Myung-soo," Kang-hyun said. His voice had gone somewhere. She hadn't heard it go before. Jun-suk nodded. Kang-hyun stopped. "He was with my father when I was a child. He came to my mother's funeral." He set the paper down. "I trusted him with the restructuring because he was the only person from my father's generation I believed was still loyal." Neither Jun-suk nor Imani said anything. 3 years, Kang-hyun said. At least. The apartment was very quiet. Outside, Seoul was doing what Seoul always did, moving. Lit, enormous, indifferent. Cars on wet streets, a siren somewhere distant. The ordinary sound of a city that contains, simultaneously, every kind of human life, including this one. Imani's watched Kang-hyun sit with it. She'd watched Malcolm sit with bad news. Before the hospital's kind, the money kind, the kind that arrives without warning and asks you to restructure everything you understood. She'd learned the hard way that the most useful thing she could do in those moments was not fix it and not fill the silence. Just stay. Just be in the room with him and not pretend it was smaller than it was. She stayed. After a while, Jun-suk said, "Park still has access to the family office filing system. He doesn't know we know yet." A pause. "That's the only advantage we have left." Kang-hyun looked at his son. Then he looked at Imani. She saw it happening, the shift. The reorganization. The moment when a person who has been looking at closed door understands that the door is the wrong approach and turns to find the window. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a speech. It was just a man deciding quietly, in a kitchen chair, splitting, that the version of this plan he'd been working toward was gone, and the new version was going to require something different from him. Something he'd been avoiding. If we can't dismantle Jang's organization through legal channels while they're defended, and we're litigating, Kang-hyun said slowly, then we don't approach it from outside. Jun-suk waited. We approach it from inside, Kang-hyun said. Through Park. You want to use him as a double channel, Imani said. He looked at her. Feed him information through the family office system. Let him pass it to Jang. Control what Jang thinks he knows. Can you do that without Park realizing? If we're careful. He looked at his son. If we're very careful. Jun-suk was quiet for a moment. Then, what do we feed him? Something that moves Jang exactly where we need him to be, Kang-hyun said. Something that makes him believe he's winning. A pause. Something that makes him expose himself completely. Plan was there in the room with them, partial and dangerous, and requiring things Kang-hyun had spent years trying to stop requiring of himself. Requiring him to operate one more time, in the language of the world he'd inherited. Not because he wanted to, because the legitimate road had been cut off, and this was the one that remained. Imani looked at him. She thought about what he'd said, I have people in my life now that I am not willing to offer as leverage. She thought about Micah in a hotel room somewhere, asleep on a strange pillow, holding his stuffed elephant. She thought about Naomi, who had not fallen apart, who had packed a bag and walked out a service exit at midnight because her mother told her to, who deserved to come home to an apartment that wasn't being watched. She thought about the fact that you can't always choose your tools. You can only choose what you're building. One question, she said to Kang-hyun. He looked at her. When this is done, when Jang is finished, and Park is dealt with, and your companies are clean, what does that look like? She held his gaze. Not the business version. The actual version. He was quiet for a moment. Legitimately nothing, he said. Every piece. Every shadow. Everything my father built that I kept out of, I don't know. Sentiment, fear, inertia, his jaw was tight. Gone. And the men who won't leave the criminal side. They leave my companies. Jun-suk, she said without looking away from Kang-hyun. Can you make that happen from the legal side? If your father does this. Yes, Jun-suk said, immediately, without qualification. She noticed that. The yes of someone who has been waiting a long time to be asked this particular question. She looked at Kang-hyun. He looked at her. Then let's get started, she said. Jun-suk began pulling documents from the second folder. Outside, snow had started. The first real snow of December, coming down past the window in unhurried, heavy flakes, the kind that accumulate before you notice them. Kind that changes the shape of everything quietly, while you're looking somewhere else. None of them noticed it for a long time. They were busy building something out of what was left, which is what you do when the original plan is gone and the people you love are in a hotel, somewhere waiting for you to find a way through, and the only road remaining is the one you swore you'd never walk again. But which? It turns out you still know every step of by heart. The plan had a name, but nobody used it. They just called it the feed, what they were putting into Park Myung-soo's hands, through the family office system, the carefully constructed picture of a Kang-hyun who was rattled, retreating, pulling his resources back toward two specific assets while he tried to manage the regulatory complaint. The picture of a man contracting under pressure, making himself smaller, becoming, in other words, exactly what Jang Tae-suk had always wanted him to become. It took 9 days to build. Jun-suk did the financial architecture, restructured accounts, shifted holdings, created the paper trail of a man pulling in. A sound 18-hour days, and ate at his desk, and came to the safe apartment on the fourth night, looking like someone had taken the Jun-suk Imani knew and put him through something that stripped the surface layer off. He sat down at the kitchen table and put his head in his hands for 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds. Then he looked up and said, "The second layer is done. Park will see it when he accesses the filing system tomorrow morning. He'll pass it to Jang tonight," Kang-hyun said. "Then Jang moves his people the day after tomorrow. At most." Kang-hyun looked at the map spread on the table. Physical, paper, The kind that doesn't require a signal or a password. The kind his father had used. Then we have 36 hours. To do what exactly? Imani asked. Both of them looked at her. She'd been in the room for all of it, every planning session, every late-night conversation, every moment when the map was consulted and the documents were cross-referenced, and the question of who could still be trusted was asked and answered with decreasing certainty. She had not pretended to understand the financial mechanisms. She had understood everything else. You've built a picture that moves Jang to a specific location at a specific time, she said. And you've built parallel documentation, the pieces Park doesn't know about, that become relevant the moment Jang is there. Yes, Kang-hyun said. And then what? You deliver the documentation to financial crimes investigators? We already days ago. He looked at her steadily. We have a contact legitimate, insulated, who has been receiving information in pieces. What we sent 3 days ago completes the picture. When Jangs moves his assets to the location we've indicated, it confirms the transaction pattern that makes the documentation actionable. And the regulatory complaint against your companies falls apart without Jang's organization to support it. Jun-suk rubbed his face. His lawyers are contingency lawyers. They don't work for free when the client is in custody. Imani sat with this for a moment. What's the part you're not telling me? She asked. A silence. Park, Kang-hyun said. What about him? Kang-hyun looked at the map. For the feed to work completely, for Jang to move everything, to expose himself fully rather than partially, Park needs to give him one more piece. Something big enough that Jang believes the timing is perfect. He paused. Something Park believes he found himself. What thing? The location of a document safe, a physical safe, in a building I own, that supposedly contains the original copies of everything I've been building against Jang. He looked at her. If Park passes this to Jang, Jang sends men for the safe. Those men, at that location, at that time, with the asset transfers happening simultaneously. He's completely exposed, Imani said. Financial and physical. Yes. And is there actually anything in the safe? Kang-hyun was quiet for a moment. There's a letter, he said. From me to Jang, a pause, I wrote it this morning. She didn't ask what the letter said. Something told her she'd find out eventually, and that finding out now would require him to perform something he wasn't ready to perform. What do you need from me? She asked instead. Kang-hyun and Jun-suk exchanged a look. Not a conspiratorial one, she knew the difference. This was the look of two people who have discussed something and disagree about it and have not resolved the disagreement. Nothing, Kang-hyun said. I need you to stay in this apartment until it's done. How long? 36 hours. Maybe. She looked at him. She looked at Jun-suk, who was looking at the table with the careful neutrality of a man trying not to take sides. All right, she said. Kang-hyun blinked. He'd expected a fight. She could see the prepared for argument in his posture, the slight readiness, and watched it recalibrate. All right, she said again, but I want a phone, a working one. And I want someone to check on Naomi every 8 hours. Yes. And when it's done, I want you to tell me everything. Not the version that protects me from the difficult parts. Everything, he held her gaze. Yes, she nodded, then go. He left at 6 in the morning, 2 days before Christmas. The apartment without him had a particular quality she was getting used to, not emptiness exactly, but the specific texture of a space that has recently contained someone and is now processing their absence. She'd felt this in her house in Atlanta after Malcolm died, except that had been permanent, and this was not. And the distinction mattered more than she could quantify. She called Naomi at 7. Micah was awake, enthusiastic, apparently having developed an intense relationship with the hotel television's cartoon programming. Naomi sounded exhausted and wired at the same time, the specific frequency of a person running on anxiety and love. How much longer? Naomi asked. I don't know exactly. Soon, Mom. Naomi's voice dropped. Are you okay? Actually okay, not the version you say, so I won't worry. Imani thought about this honestly. I'm scared, she said. But I'm not, she looked for the right word. I'm not lost. You know what I mean? A pause. Yeah, Naomi said softly. I know what you mean. How's Dong-wook? He talks now. At least. A short, complicated sound. We're talking. Actually talking. Good. It's hard. Hard things usually are. Imani looked out the window at the gray December morning. That's not a flaw. That's just the design. After she hung up, she made coffee and sat with it and thought about the design of things. The way crises have a tendency to break open what was already cracked, Dong-wook's secret, Jun-seok's distance, the pieces of Kang-hyun's inherited world that he'd been living alongside, without fully reckoning with. She thought about how sometimes the worst thing that happens is also the thing that finally makes it impossible to keep avoiding the truth. She thought about Malcolm, who had died without warning, which meant they never had the chance to have the hard conversations. Some of them she still carried unfinished, like sentences interrupted midway that she'd never get to complete. She thought, at least this is a story still being written. The first call came at 4 in the afternoon. Not Kang-hyun, Jun-seok. Park accessed the system at 9 this morning, Jun-seok said. He sounded like he'd been running, or like he hadn't stopped moving since they spoke last. He took what we put there. We confirmed transmission to Jang's organization at 11:17. The location of the safe. Yes, a pause. Jang's people are moving toward the building now. Our investigators are positioned. The asset transfers are being monitored in real time. Another pause longer with something underneath it. But there's a problem. She waited. Jang isn't sending people to the building, Jun-seok said. He's going himself. Imani absorbed this. Is that bad? It means he believes this is the moment. The definitive moment, the one where he recovers everything and ends the threat from my father permanently. A tight exhale. Men who believe in a moment do things that careful men don't do. What kind of things? He's bringing more people than we anticipated. Armed. A pause. The investigators can't move with that many people in the building. Changes what they can do legally. What does your father say? My father is at the building. The bottom of her stomach dropped approximately 2 floors. Why, she said. Flat, controlled. Because the letter in the safe Jun-seok stopped. She could hear him deciding how to say it. The letter isn't just a letter. It's the original documentation. The actual copies. Everything we built, plus everything from before information my father has held for 10 years about Jang's operation that he was never willing to use because using it would have required him to expose things about our own family, that Jun-seok's voice went careful. That he protected us from me, my mother's memory, the family's name. Imani set down her coffee cup. He decided to put it all in the safe, she said. Yes. Including the parts that implicate the Seo family. Yes. And Jang knows that's what he's walking into. Jang thinks he's walking in to recover the evidence against him. He doesn't know about the rest. Jun-seok paused. My father is there to make sure Jang understands in person exactly what he's walking into. What the full cost of continuing is, he's going to confront him. Yes. Jun-seok. She stood up from the table. How many people does Jang have in that building right now? The pause was too long. Jun-seok 14, he said. That we've counted. She was already moving toward the window, then back, the particular pacing of a person whose body understands a threat before her plan does. Where are you? 2 blocks out. I can't go and my father told me to stay outside. And you're listening to him? A pause, Jun-seok said. Until I called you. She grabbed her coat from the chair. Send me the address, she said. He told me specifically. Send me the address, Jun-seok. 3 seconds. Then her phone buzzed with a location. She told the security man by the door that she was going out. He told her he'd been instructed to keep her in the apartment. She told him that she respected that and that he should call Kang-hyun and let him know she was leaving, and that if he wanted to follow her, that was his choice, but she was leaving. He called. He followed. The building was a converted warehouse on the eastern edge of Mapo Old Brick, 5 floors. It's the kind of structure that had been industrial once and been retrofitted several times without ever quite settling into a new identity. She arrived to find Jun-seok on the street outside with 2 of his father's remaining trusted men, all of them projecting the specific tension of people trying not to project tension. Jun-seok looked at her. He's on the 3rd floor, Jun-seok said. Jang and his people came in the east entrance. My father is in the office, off the main corridor. That's where the safe is. Are they in the same room? Not yet. Zhang's people are clearing the building first. He checked his phone. The investigators are positioned outside. They can't enter until there's evidence of an actual transaction. Zhang has to touch the safe. Open it. That's the trigger. How long? 10 minutes. Maybe 15. And your father is in there alone. He has 2 men. Against. Jun-suk didn't answer. He didn't need to. Imani looked at the building. She thought about a 60-year-old man sitting in a room waiting for the thing he'd been building toward for years. To either work or not work, knowing that if it didn't work, there was no third option, no retreat, no negotiating table left. She thought about what it meant to put every remaining piece on the board at once, including the pieces that cost you personally, the ones with family names attached, the ones you'd protected even while you were trying to dismantle everything else. She thought about the letter. Is there a way in that Zhang's people aren't covering? She asked. Jun-suk stared at her. You're not going in. I'm asking a question. Mrs. Whitaker, Imani, she said. And I'm asking a question, not a permission. He looked at her for a long moment, with an expression that moved through several things and landed on something that was, she thought, the beginning of respect. West stairwells, he said finally. It exits to the alley. Zhang's people are covering the east and the main entrance, but the west. He checked his phone. Thermal shows 2 people on the 2nd floor. 3rd floor is clear except for my father's position and Zhang's forward team, which is in the east corridor. She started walking. Imani, Jun-suk, caught her arm. Not grabbing, just contact, stopping her. She turned. His face was different from every other time she'd seen it. The composure was still there, the control, but underneath it, she could see the thing he was actually made of, the thing that had been looking for somewhere to land since she walked into his father's life. He's going to be angry. I know, he's going to tell you to leave. I know that too. Jun-suk let go of her arm. He looked at the building. He looked at her. West stairwell, he said quietly. 3rd door on the left at the top of the stairs. She went. The west stairwell smelled like old concrete and something metallic she didn't want to think about. She went up slowly. Listening at each landing, the security man was behind her. She could hear his breathing, and she was grateful for him in a way she hadn't expected to be. Not because she needed protecting, because she needed to know that someone who knew the building's geometry was tracking her movement. 2nd floor. Quiet. The sound of movement somewhere to the east, muffled, organized, the systematic sounds of people clearing rooms. 3rd floor. She pushed through the door at the top of the stairs and stood in a corridor lit by emergency lighting that turned everything the color of old photographs. 3rd door on the left. She moved toward it. From the east corridor, voices. Korean low, the kind of low that isn't quiet but is controlled. Getting closer. She opened the 3rd door. Kang-hyun was standing in the center of a room that was mostly bare concrete floor, a single window, a desk, and in the corner, a gray steel safe that was chest-high and absolutely unremarkable. One of his 2 men was near the window. The other was at the door on the east side of the room, listening. Kang-hyun turned when she came in. She watched his face do 4 things in approximately 2 seconds: recognition, relief, fury, and then the suppression of all 3 under something that came out, looking like a man who is trying very hard not to have an emotional response in a crisis. What are you doing here? He said. Not a question. The voice of a man speaking through clenched teeth. Standing here, she said. You were supposed to. I was supposed to stay in an apartment while you were in a building with 14 of Zhang's people. She crossed the room until she was close enough to speak without volume. That was never going to happen. Imani, tell me the situation, she said. We don't have time. His jaw worked. A muscle in it. Specifically, she'd learned to watch that particular muscle. He looked at his man near the window, who very carefully looked at nothing. Zhang is in the east corridor, Kang-hyun said, very low. He'll be here in approximately 5 minutes. His men will enter first and secure the room. Then he'll come. He looked at her. The safe is open. The documentation is visible. When Zhang sees it, when he touches it, that's the trigger for the investigators outside. And then it's done. He said it with an absolute flatness that told her everything about what it cost him. She looked at the safe. From where she stood, she could see the papers inside, dense, filed, years of careful collection. She could also see, sitting on top of everything else, a single sealed envelope. The letter, she said. Yes. Jun-suk told me what it contains. His face moved. Jun-suk talks too much. Enough, she looked at him. You put your family's history in that safe. What my father built. Not your father, your family. She held his gaze. Things that reflect on you. On Jun-suk, he was quiet. Kang-hyun. She said his name the way she'd learned to say it, not a summons, not a softening, just his name as itself. I need to know that you're doing this because it's right. Not because you're punishing yourself. The silence was approximately 5 seconds. Both, he said. She nodded. She'd expected that. Both is all right, she said. Both is honest. From the east corridor, the voices were closer now. Footsteps. Organized. Deliberate. His man at the east door held up 3 fingers. Then 2. Kang-hyun looked at Imani. Get behind the desk. No. I'm not hiding behind the desk, she said. I'm standing here, right here in this room, because I am not a person who hides in rooms while things happen outside them, and you knew that when you met me. She looked at him directly. And because Jang needs to see that what he's tried to use against you is standing next to you by choice. Not hostage, not leverage, choice. Something in Kang-hyun's face broke and reassembled in the space of one breath. The east door opened. 2 of Jang's men came in first. Large, efficient, scanning the room with the practiced thoroughness of people whose job description is threats. They saw Kang-hyun. They saw Imani. They saw the security man by the window, and the one who'd been at the door, who was now at Kang-hyun's barely perceptible signal, standing relaxed, in a way that made clear he wasn't going to be the first to move. One of them spoke into a radio. 30 seconds passed. Then Jang Tae-suk walked through the door. He was 63 years old, and he looked like a man who had spent 6 decades winning not visibly, not loudly, but the particular kind of winning that leaves a permanent mark on the body. He was slightly shorter than Kang-hyun, heavier through the shoulders, with a face that had been handsome since, and was now something more durable. He looked at the room the way a man looks at something he's already decided belongs to him. His eyes moved to Imani. He looked at her for a long moment. Not with menace worse than that. With the assessing calm of someone who understands exactly what you represent and is calculating the most efficient use of that information. Then he looked at Kang-hyun and spoke in Korean. Kang-hyun responded. Whatever was said carried a weight. Imani couldn't parse in words, but could feel completely the specific gravity of 2 men who have a long, complicated, unfinished history, finally standing in the same room with nothing left to pretend. He says, Kang-hyun said quietly, for Imani's benefit, that I've made a mistake bringing a woman here. Tell him, Imani said, that I brought myself. Kang-hyun translated. Something moved across Jang's face. Not quite amusement. Recognition. Maybe the recognition of a variable that doesn't fit his calculation. Jang spoke again. He wants to know if I understand what he can still do, Kang-hyun said. He says the documentation in the safe doesn't matter. His lawyers will dismantle it. His political contacts will bury the investigators. He says I've spent years trying to exit his world, and I should understand by now that there's no exit. A pause. He says this was always going to end with me, coming back to him. Imani looked at Jang. He was watching her watch him, with the patient curiosity of someone who has never in his life been surprised by a woman and intends to maintain that record. Him something, she said to Kang-hyun. What? Ask him if he has children. Kang-hyun looked at her for a beat. Then he asked. Jang's eyes sharpened. He answered short. 1 word. 2, Kang-hyun said. Ask him if they know what he does. Another look, he asked. Jang's answer was longer this time, and it was delivered without looking at Kang-hyun. He was looking at Imani, directly, and his voice had a different quality to it, something that wasn't quite anger, but lived near it. He says that's not your concern, Kang-hyun said. It's not, she agreed. I'm just wondering if his children know that the man who is in this building right now, about to pick up documents from a safe that he believes contains evidence against him is being photographed by 3 separate surveillance cameras. She looked at the corners of the room in sequence, deliberately, letting her eyes track to each position, and that the financial crimes unit outside has had a complete transaction file for 72 hours and is waiting for him to touch that safe. The room changed. It changed the way rooms change when information lands that can't be unlanded, not noisily, but absolutely. She watched it move through Jang's body, the slight stillness, the reorientation, the rapid recalculation behind his eyes. He looked at the corners of the room. He looked at the safe. He looked at Kang-hyun. Kang-hyun said something in Korean. Very quietly, just for Jang. Jang didn't respond. Kang-hyun said it again. Still quiet. Still just for him. She asked later what it was. He told her, "It's done, Tae-sik. Let it be done." Jang's men in the room were reading their boss's body language with the fine-tuned attention of men whose continued employment depended on it. Could feel them recalibrating, could feel the shift in the room's physics, the way a situation tips from one gravity to another. Jang took one step toward the safe. Kang-hyun said, "Don't." Jang stopped at, "If you touch it," Kang-hyun said, in English now, clearly, "for the room, for the cameras, you trigger everything. You know that now." He waited. "But if you don't, if you walk out of this building right now, the file the investigators have is sufficient. You won't avoid consequences, but you'll avoid the additional charges that come from this transaction." He looked at Jang steadily. "I'm giving you the choice I wasn't given when I inherited what my father built. I'm giving you the option of deciding how this ends." Jang looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at Imani. She didn't look away. She was 60 years old and she was tired, and her knees hurt, and she was not afraid of this man, which was perhaps the most useful thing about her in this room right now. Jang said something one sentence, short, and turned, and walked toward the east door. His men followed. The room was quiet. Kang-hyun's security man by the window exhaled, long and slow like a pressure valve releasing. The other one said something in Korean that Kang-hyun answered without looking at him. Then Kang-hyun looked at Imani. "What did he say?" she asked. "When he left." Kang-hyun was quiet for a moment. He said Kang-hyun told her, "I hope she was worth it." Imani absorbed this. "What did you say?" Kang-hyun looked at her with the expression that didn't have a name, the one she'd been collecting. "Nothing," he said. There was nothing to say. Her phone buzzed. Junsuk, investigators moving in, east entrance. Jang's people are... Text cut off. Then it's working. It's actually working. She showed Kang-hyun the screen. He read it. He stood with it for a moment. Then he did something she hadn't seen him do, not once, in all the weeks she'd known him. He sat down on the concrete floor, not gracefully, not planned. He just sat down, his back against the desk, and put his head back and closed his eyes, and breathed. She sat down next to him. The concrete was cold and hard and entirely uncomfortable. She sat on it anyway. They could hear movement in the building, organized, purposeful. The sound of investigators who have been waiting for a very specific moment and have now received it. From somewhere below, voices, commands. The building beginning to fill with the consequence of everything that had been set in motion. Kang-hyun said, without opening his eyes, "You told him about the cameras." "Yes, there are no cameras." She paused. "I know." He opened his eyes, looked at her. "You bluffed." I redirected his attention, she said. "There's a difference. Is there?" "Marginally." She looked at her hands. He was about to touch the safe. If he touched the safe with that many of his people in the building, the investigators couldn't move safely. So I needed him to stop without him knowing I needed him to stop. She paused. Children were the right question. Everyone with children has one moment where they think about their children instead of their situation. I needed that moment. Kang-hyun looked at her for a long time. "You've never done anything like this before in your life," he said. "No," she agreed. And yet she looked at him. "I was a school teacher for 27 years. I have managed rooms full of people who didn't want to do what I needed them to do, using only my voice and a very limited toolkit." She paused. "The principles are similar." He looked at her. His face was doing the thing again. the complicated, unnamed thing, and she held his gaze and let it do whatever it needed to do. My father would have liked you, he said quietly. She wasn't sure how to take that, given everything she knew about his father. I'll take it as a compliment, she said. It is one. He looked at the ceiling. He was not a good man. But he respected people who knew exactly how much they were capable of and used it without apology. A pause. He would have said you were formidable. I've been called worse. His hand on the concrete floor beside her shifted slightly. Not reaching, just shifting an adjustment. His fingers 2 inches from hers. She looked at it. She put her hand down next to his. Close. Not touching, almost. From outside the room, Jun-suk's voice calling, getting closer, his footsteps in the corridor with the particular rhythm of a young man who is trying not to run, because running would mean admitting how scared he was. In here, Kang-hyun called. The door opened. Jun-suk stood in the frame and looked at his father sitting on a concrete floor next to a 60-year-old woman from Atlanta, both of them looking up at him from the ground, and something moved across his face that resolved, eventually, into the closest thing to relief she'd seen on a human face in a long time. It's done, Jun-suk said. Tell me, Kang-hyun said. Jang and 4 of his people were detained at the east exit. The asset transfers flagged simultaneously. The investigators had everything they needed. The regulatory complaint against us has already been flagged as retaliatory filing. He checked his phone. Park Myung-soo's residence is being searched. He lowered the phone. Done, father. Kang-hyun closed his eyes again. One breath. Just one. When he opened them, he looked at Imani. I have to make calls, he said. I know. This isn't finished. There are processes, legal, financial. It will be weeks before the full. Kang-hyun. She looked at him steadily. I know. Make the calls. He looked at her. She looked at him. His fingers on the concrete floor moved the last 2 inches and closed around hers. He held her hand for approximately 4 seconds. Quiet. No performance. Just contact. The specific kind that means I know where I am and you're here, and that's the only thing I'm certain of right now. Then he let go. He got up from the floor not easily, with the particular effort of a 57-year-old man who has been sitting on concrete and brushed off his coat, and looked at his son and said something in Korean. Jun-suk nodded, looked at Imani. I'll stay with her, he said. To his father, about her, like it was decided. Kang-hyun looked at his son for a moment. Thank you, he said, and walked out into the corridor where the building was filling, with everything that comes after, all the necessary machinery of consequence, which was loud and complicated and was going to take a very long time, and which was also undeniably, finally, after 30 years, the right direction. Jun-suk sat down in his father's place on the concrete floor. Imani looked at him. Your father is going to be fine, she said. I know. He was quiet for a moment. Are you? She thought about it honestly. I'm going to need to sit here for another minute, she said. Okay, he said. They sat. The building made its sounds around them. Outside, Seoul was doing what it always did. Inside in this room, a sound like green wood splitting with the open safe in the corner, and the envelope sitting on top of everything, and the cold working its way through the concrete floor, Imani Whitaker sat with the son of the man she was falling in love with and breathed in and out, and waited for her hands to fully stop shaking, which took about 4 more minutes, which was longer than she would have liked, but also, all things considered, entirely reasonable. The paperwork started the next morning and didn't stop for 3 weeks. Imani hadn't understood before all of this how much of dismantling a criminal organization looks like accounting. It looked like men in suits carrying boxes out of buildings. It looked like computers being removed from offices. It looked like phone calls that lasted 4 hours and left Kang-hyun at his kitchen table at 2 in the morning with cold coffee and a legal pad covered in numbers that he'd circled and crossed out and circled again. It looked, mostly, like exhaustion, the specific, grinding kind that doesn't come from one bad night, but from sustained pressure over a long time, finally releasing all at once, leaving the body unsure what to do with the absence of it. She saw all of this because she was there. That was the thing. She hadn't anticipated how naturally she'd moved from the safe apartment into his life's actual orbit. Not into his home, not yet. Not in the way that required a conversation neither of them had started. But into his days, into the rhythm of his weeks. She'd go back to Naomi's apartment. At night, Naomi was home now. The building was safe. Kang-hyun's people had quietly confirmed this, and she'd spend mornings with Micah and afternoons available. And Kang-hyun would call or appear. And she'd read her book in his office, while he worked through the aftermath of everything, and neither of them had addressed the fact that this had become the shape of their lives. She figured they'd get there. There was a lot of getting there to do first. Dong-fook's formal meeting with his wife happened on a Thursday, 9 days after the building. Imani was not in the room for it. She took Micah to the park December in Seoul, cold enough that her breath showed, Micah bundled so thoroughly that only his eyes were visible, sitting in his stroller like a very small and very opinionated emperor surveying his territory. They stayed for an hour and a half. When she brought him back, Naomi was in the kitchen with red eyes and a stillness that wasn't quite peace, but was the thing that comes after the storm decides. It said everything it needs to say. Dong-wook was on the couch. He looked like a man who had been taken apart and was trying to figure out how to put himself back together with slightly different pieces. "You okay?" Imani asked Naomi. Naomi considered the question seriously. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I think I'm going to be." Imani nodded. She took Micah out of his 17 layers and handed him to his father, who took him with the particular desperate gratitude of a man who needed something uncomplicated to hold. Micah grabbed Dong-wook's nose with both hands and laughed. Dong-wook's face crumpled for approximately 1 second. Then he pulled it back together, mostly. "Hey, buddy," he said, very quietly. Imani went to make tea. She stayed in the kitchen a long time. Park Young-soo was arrested on a Wednesday, but the news of it reached Kang-hyun on a Tuesday night, a preliminary call from the investigators, a heads-up before the official action. Kang-hyun was at his company office when it came through. Imani was in the chair by the window, reading, when she heard him set the phone down on his desk, with a particular kind of care, not slamming it, not putting it down casually, but setting it down like something fragile. She looked up. He was facing away from her, just standing there, looking at the city through the office window, his hands at his sides. She waited. After a while, he said, 11 years. "I know," she said. "I paid for his daughter's first surgery." She hadn't known that. She didn't say so. "He needed money faster than I could give it," Kang-hyun said. He was still facing the window. His voice was very level. The level of someone who has decided how they're going to carry something and is demonstrating the decision. "He should have come to me. I would have found a way." His jaw moved. Instead, he went to Jang. "People make bad decisions when they're afraid," Imani said. "Yes." A pause. "I know that." She got up from the chair and came to stand beside him at the window. Not quite touching. The city was lit below them, Seoul at night, indifferent and extraordinary. "The daughter," she said. "Is she okay?" "She's in remission." He looked at the glass. "Since last spring." She nodded. They stood there together for a while, looking at the city, and she thought about the way bad decisions branch out from Pain Dong-wook, borrowing from the wrong people because he was terrified of losing Micah. Park selling information because he was terrified of losing his daughter. All of it a sprawling tree of fear growing in the dark, invisible until it wasn't. "Will you help his daughter?" Imani asked. He looked at her. "Anonymously," she said. "The girl didn't do anything. She's in remission, but remission isn't free. Medical costs don't stop." She looked at him. "You don't have to, I'm just asking." He was quiet for a long time. "Yes," he said finally. She nodded. She went back to her chair. She picked up her book. He stayed at the window a while longer, and then he went back to his desk, and they stayed in the room together until late. Jang Tae-suk's formal arraignment happened on a Friday in mid-December. Kang-hyun didn't attend. He sent Jun Si-tuk, who reported back by text in terse, factual sentences, charges filed, bail denied, trial date set, lawyers already maneuvering. The regulatory complaint against Kang-hyun's companies was formally withdrawn 4 days later, which happened without ceremony. Just a letter from Jang's legal team and a confirmation from Kang-hyun's that it was done. The last of Kang-hyun's father's criminal side operations shut down on December 19th. The two men who had refused to leave the criminal world were formally separated from CO Meridian Holdings on the same day by Jun-suk, who handled the meetings himself and came to dinner afterward, looking like a man who had done something difficult and necessary, and was not entirely sorry about it. They had dinner, the three of them, that night: Imani, Kang-hyun, Jun-suk, at the small restaurant where she and Kang-hyun had first sat across from each other over bowls of stew. The owner recognized Kang-hyun, brought food without being asked, disappeared into the kitchen. The television in the corner was showing a different soccer match. Jun-suk ordered in Korean and then looked at Imani and switched, mid-sentence, without apparent effort, to English. "I ordered the same thing you had last time," he said. "According to my father, your father remembered what I ordered."
My father remembered everything.
Jun-suk said it with the complicated affect of a man who has spent 32 years being the son of someone who remembers everything. Occasionally inconvenient. Kang-hyun looked at his son with an expression that was almost entirely a performance of injury. Imani laughed. It surprised her not that it was funny, but that the laugh came so easily, from somewhere uncomplicated after everything. She'd forgotten that was still available to her. Not the ability to laugh, she hadn't lost that. But the specific quality of it, not the laugh you deploy at appropriate moments, not the laugh that gets you through something, but the involuntary kind. The kind that arrives because something is simply genuinely funny and your body responds to it before your mind weighs in. Kang-hyun watched her laugh and did the thing she'd noticed the first time his face changed completely, softened at the edges, became someone's who didn't have to be anything in particular. Jun-suk watched his father watch Imani and had the grace to look at the table. Christmas was Naomi's idea, which meant it was less chaotic in the specific way that Naomi's ideas tended to be ambitious, warm, logistically optimistic. She'd decided that both families were having Christmas dinner in her apartment, which was not a large apartment, which was going to require creative use of every surface available, which Naomi had apparently decided was a design challenge rather than a problem. The night before, she called Imani. "I need you to make the jollof rice," she said. "I was going to anyway. And cornbread. Micah has developed strong feelings about cornbread. We're leaning into it." Naomi, who is both families exactly. Us, obviously. You, Dong-wook, Micah, then Kang-hyun and Jun-suk. That's 5 people and a baby. 6 if you count the baby, which I do. He has opinions. The apartment is 3 rooms. We're using the hallway. Imani thought about this. What is Jun-suk bringing? He said he'd handle the Korean side of the food. I said fine as long as he brings enough galbi, because last time he brought what I personally consider an insufficient quantity of galbi. When was there a last time? Naomi was quiet for a beat. 2 weeks ago. We've been having dinner together. Kind of. It started because of all of it, and then it just kept going. A pause. Is that weird? Imani looked at the ceiling of the room she was in, Kang-hyun's office again. Chair by the window. Late afternoon. The man himself on a call in the next room. She thought about how things take root when you're not watching them. About how families can configure themselves around the people who need them, regardless of whether that was the original plan. No, she said. That's not weird at all. Christmas morning was Micah's. It just was. There was no way for it to be anything else, with an 18-month-old in the room who had woken at 6 and been vibrating with a low-frequency excitement about the general concept of wrapped objects ever since. Imani watched him tear through paper with the focused intensity of a scientist, conducting an important experiment, and she thought about Malcolm at Christmas. The way he'd always been the one who made everything too much. Too many presents. Too much food. Who'd stayed up too late assembling things that required tools. Who'd worn the ridiculous sweater every year as a personal commitment to the bit. She thought about him without the usual weight of it. Just thought about him, the way you eventually learn to, not with the 3 a.m. kitchen grief, but with the particular warmth of a memory that has been fully accepted as memory. He was there in the room with her the same way he was always there. The way 34 years of a real marriage lives on in the body of the person who survived it. Present, not painful. She watched Micah hold up a wooden toy horse and yell at it with approval. She thought, "You'd have loved this, Malcolm. You really would." Jun-suk arrived at 11 carrying more galbi than anyone had requested and a wooden toy that he produced from a bag, with the studied nonchalance of a man who has not practiced this moment for several days and is absolutely not doing that. Micah identified the toy immediately, despite there being approximately 12 other things on the floor. He walked to Jun-suk with the aggressive confidence of someone who has decided the connection is established and requires no further negotiation, and he held up his arms. Jun-suk picked him up. He was better at it now, not holding him out, not uncertain. Saeed tucked Micah against his hip like he'd been doing it longer than he had, and Micah grabbed his jacket collar and looked around the apartment from this new height with the satisfaction of someone who has achieved an upgrade. Naomi, from the kitchen doorway, watched this with an expression Imani recognized from about 30 years ago, the look of someone seeing something they didn't expect and finding they have no objection to it whatsoever. Dong-wook appeared beside his wife, looked at Jun-suk with Micah, looked at Naomi, put his hand on her back. She didn't pull away from it. Small, significant. Kang-hyun arrived last. She'd known he would. He'd told her the previous night that he had something to finish in the morning, a final document that needed his signature to complete the last legal restructuring of the company, and that he'd be there by noon. He arrived at 12:17, which was close enough, and he came through the door, looking like a man who had slept a full night, for the first time in weeks, which she suspected was exactly what had happened. He brought wine. He brought flowers, which Naomi immediately put in the only vase and positioned on the kitchen counter with the proprietary satisfaction of someone decorating their own space. He shook Dong-wook's hand that met twice before, both times in difficult circumstances, and this was the first time that meeting happened in a room that was warm and full of food and not requiring anything of anyone. Dong-wook said something quietly. Kang-hyun responded. She couldn't hear either of them, but she could see the quality of it, an apology, met with something that was not forgiveness exactly, but was acknowledgement, which was the realistic version of forgiveness, the kind that actual people give each other in actual circumstances. Then Kang-hyun came to the kitchen where Imani was finishing the cornbread, and he stood beside her, the way he'd learned to stand beside her close enough to be in the same conversation as her, without requiring anything. Not directing, not filling the space, just there. "It smells remarkable," he said. "Don't tell me that until you've eaten it. You don't know what remarkable is until the cornbread is in front of you. I've been eating your cooking for 3 weeks. You've been eating things I made in offices and safe apartments on limited equipment." She turned the cornbread out onto the rack. "This is the real version. This is what it's supposed to be." He picked up a dish towel and handed it to her when she needed it without being asked. And she thought, that thing, right there. The particular attentiveness of someone who watches you and learns you and doesn't make a production of applying what they've learned. She thought, "I'm not completely in love with you yet." Then she thought, "But I'm wrong about the yet." She didn't say any of this. She took the dish towel. They ate for 2 hours. The apartment, which was not big enough for 6 adults, and a baby and 2 culinary traditions occupying every flat surface, turned out to be exactly the right size. Imani didn't know how Naomi had arranged it, but there were chairs enough and plates enough, and the jollof rice and the galbi were on the same table, which shouldn't have worked aesthetically and absolutely worked in practice. And Micah spent the meal moving from lap to lap like a small dignitary conducting inspections. He ended up in Jun-suk's lap for the last 40 minutes. Jun-suk ate with one hand and held Micah steady with the other, and argued with Dong-wook about something Imani didn't follow because it was happening in Korean, but she could tell from the rhythm of it that it wasn't an argument, it was the kind of back and forth that looks like arguing and is actually 2 people finding out they enjoy talking to each other. Naomi sat next to Imani at one point and said quietly, "Is this your life now?" Imani looked at the table, at the food and the people, and the argument happening in Korean across from her and Micah asleep against Jun-suk's chest with his mouth open. "I think it might be," she said. Naomi leaned against her shoulder briefly. 1 second, just that. Good, she said. Later, after the dishes were done, which took a collective negotiation, because Naomi insisted on organizing the effort and Jun-suk had opinions about how dishes should be stacked that he expressed with surprising passion, the apartment settled into the particular quiet of after. Micah was in his crib. Dong-wook had fallen asleep on the couch with his mouth open, which Naomi photographed without mercy. Jun-suk was at the small table with his phone, working through something, and Naomi had gone to check on Micah and not come back, which meant she was probably sitting in the rocking chair in the dark, watching him breathe the way she did sometimes. Imani and Kang-hyun stood at the kitchen window with their coffee. The city was quiet in the specific way it gets, on Christmas evening, not empty but resting. Lights on in buildings, the distant sound of traffic, the particular texture of a city that contains, somewhere in it, every version of this holiday happening simultaneously. He reached into his jacket pocket. She saw it coming, not the specific object, but the movement. The particular care of someone retrieving something they've been carrying and waiting on. She watched him hold it for a moment before he offered it. A small box, plain, no ribbon. I wasn't certain about the timing, he said. She looked at the box. Open it for me? He opened it. A necklace, simple gold chain. The pendant was small, a smooth oval, and on its surface, engraved in 2 scripts, one she recognized and one she was learning, a single word. Stay. She looked at it for a long moment. I had it made before any of this happened, he said. Before he stopped, started again. I wasn't sure I was going to give it to you. I thought it might be, I thought it was too much. Too soon. To Kang-hyun, he stopped. She took the box from him. She looked at the pendant again. Stay. In Korean and in English. Both. The parallel inscription of a man who had understood from early on that she existed in 2 languages at once, in the one she'd brought and the one she was learning, and had built his ask accordingly. My mother used to say, she told him, that love doesn't announce itself. Just shows up and starts making itself at home, and by the time you understand what's happening, it's already put the furniture where it wants it. She looked up at him. I've been watching this thing make itself at home in me for 2 months. I keep telling myself it's too fast, that I don't know you well enough, that I'm not done. She stopped. Tried again. I spent 34 years with a man who was my whole house. And then he was gone, and I thought the house was just closed now. That I'd live in it, but it wasn't going to be built on anymore. Kang-hyun was very still, listening. I'm not completely in love with you yet, she said. He absorbed this. But I'm wrong about the yet, she said. I figured that out tonight. I was watching you eat galbi in my daughter's kitchen with my grandson asleep on the man who is going to be his uncle, whether anybody officially decided that or not. And I thought I'm wrong about the yet. She looked at him. It's already there. I've just been calling it something else because calling it what it is felt like moving something Malcolm left there. She stopped. He didn't leave it there, Kang-hyun said quietly. He left you there. There's a difference. She looked at him. He held her gaze. I'm not asking you to move anything Malcolm left, he said. I don't have any interest in the space he occupied. That belongs to him and it belongs to you and it doesn't need to be given to anyone. He looked at the pendant in the box she was holding. I'm asking if there's any room alongside it. That's the only thing I'm asking. She thought about the necklace. About stay in 2 languages. She thought about a freezing November evening and a card with a phone number she almost didn't use and dinner in a restaurant the size of a closet and 34 years of a man she'd loved completely and buried at 60 and never expected to survive as well as she had. She thought about what it means to survive something completely. Not just remain standing, not just function, but actually survive, come out the other side still capable of this. Still capable of sitting in a rocking chair at 2 in the morning with a grandchild and thinking that the world is astonishing. Still capable of standing at a kitchen window on Christmas night and recognizing with everything she knew about grief and time and the brutal honesty of getting older that this man was worth the risk. Put it on, she said. He took the necklace from the box. His hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady. Kang-hyun, who had sat across from Jang Tae-sik in a warehouse room and not flinched, whose voice in a crisis went quieter rather than louder, whose stillness under pressure had struck her from the first night as the stillness of someone who had been tested many times, and held this man's hands were slightly unsteady, putting a necklace on her. Turned around. He settled the chain against the back of her neck. His fingers moved carefully with the clasp, not rushing it, not fumbling, just patient and precise. When it was done, he didn't immediately step back. He stayed where he was, close behind her, and she felt him exhale long, slow, the exhale of something released. She turned back around. The pendant rested at the base of her throat. She didn't touch it. She looked at him. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Good," he said. Very quiet. From the living room, Dong-wook snored himself awake and said something confused in Korean. Jun-sik responded from the table without looking up, and Dong-wook subsided. Made his sleeping sounds. Somewhere in the building, a door closed, and somebody's television played something neither of them could hear clearly. Kang-hyun reached over and turned off the kitchen light. Not for any particular reason. He just did it, and the kitchen went to the ambient light of the city through the window, and they stood there together in that dark, that wasn't really dark, in the middle of a Christmas that had been improbable in every way from the beginning. Next year, he said, "We need a bigger table." She almost laughed. "Next year, I want Naomi to actually let someone else organize the dishes." "That won't happen." "I know." She looked at him. "But I'm going to enjoy the attempt." He smiled. The complete version of it, the one that came out when he wasn't monitoring it. She'd learned to wait for that one. Spring came to Seoul the way it always did, slowly. Then all at once, the way springs do when they've been built up behind a long winter and finally find the pressure becomes unsustainable. The cherry blossoms arrived on a Tuesday and were gone by the following Wednesday, which struck Imani as a particularly Korean attitude toward beauty, intense, brief, unapologetic about not lasting longer. She'd started taking Korean lessons in February. Not from a class, not from an app from Kang-hyun, who turned out to be a specific kind of patient about language, willing to correct her 15 times on the same pronunciation, without his voice shifting in any way that suggested frustration, willing to explain the logic of a grammatical structure 4 different ways until one of them landed. He was, she discovered, the kind of teacher that emerges from someone who had to learn things the hard way himself, doesn't assume any other way is obvious. She was not good at Korean. She was getting less bad, which was progress. Jun-suk had taken to correcting her in a way that was approximately 40% helpful and 60% enjoying himself, which she had decided to take as affection and which she suspected it was. He came to Naomi's apartment on Thursdays now, not officially. There was no official version. He just showed up on Thursdays because Micah had identified Thursday as Jun-sik Day and made his views on the subject known with sufficient enthusiasm that the schedule had become self-enforcing. He and Dong-wook had developed a friendship that both of them would have probably described as "we eat together sometimes," and which was, in the quiet way of friendships between people who don't make a production of things, actually real. Naomi, watching this one Thursday from the kitchen doorway, said to Imani, "Do you think they realize they actually like each other?" "They know," Imani said. "They're just not going to say so for approximately another year." Men, Imani agreed. The last of Seoul Meridian's restructuring completed in March. Kang-hyun signed the final documents on a Wednesday morning in his office, with Jun-sik beside him and a notary and 2 lawyers who had been working on this for 5 months and looked like people who were glad to see the end of it. The company that emerged from the other side was legitimate in every corner of itself. Not a negotiated legitimacy, not the kind that has asterisks. The actual thing. Imani wasn't there for the signing. She found out about it at dinner that evening. When Kang-hyun arrived at Naomi's apartment, they'd started rotating between locations without deciding to. Another thing that had established itself while no one was officially establishing it, and sat down and said, "It's done." She looked at him. All of it. Naomi, from the other room, said, "Is that the thing? Is that the actual thing?" "Yes," Kang-hyun called back. Naomi appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at Kang-hyun for a moment. Then she nodded once, the nod of someone who has been waiting for a verdict and has just received the one she needed. Good, she said. You're staying for dinner then. He stayed for dinner. Junsi woke up at 7 without being invited, which had also become a pattern, and they ate at the table that was still too small but had expanded by one folding chair and a determination not to mention the cramped geometry. Dong-wook made something he'd been working on for 2 weeks, a dish that was half Korean and half an approximation of something he'd eaten at Imani's table once and asked about. It was imperfect. Everyone said so, because that was the kind of table it had become honest about imperfection, which was the thing that made it safe. He said he'd work on it. Junsuk said he'd eaten worse things. Then admitted, when pressed, that he'd eaten it twice more since the first attempt, and it was getting better. Dong-wook looked like a man who had just received something he hadn't expected and wasn't sure what to do with it yet. He'd been wearing that look a lot lately. Learning how to receive things was slower than learning to give them, but he was working at it. Imani watched him work at it and thought, there you go. That's it. Just keep doing that. Micah banged a spoon on his high chair tray throughout the entire meal, and nobody told him to stop, because the spoon banging was its own kind of commentary, and it was mostly on point. Later, once the apartment had settled into the after-dinner, quiet, and Micah was down, and Dong-wook was washing dishes, with Jun-suk beside him, handing things over in an assembly line they'd fallen into without negotiating. Imani and Kang-hyun sat on the small balcony in their coats, because spring in Seoul was still requiring coats at night, and the city was lit below them, and the air smelled like something green and new arriving. She'd been thinking about something since February. She'd been not saying it in the specific way you don't say something when you know it's real, but you want to give it a little more time to settle before you take it out and look at it directly. I called my son last week, she said. He looked at her. Deshaun, my oldest, he's in Florida. She watched the city. I told him about you. What did he say? He asked if I was okay. I said yes. He asked if I was sure. I said yes. She smiled slightly. Then he said, Mama, if he makes you happy, then I just need to know he's not an idiot. She paused. I told him you were not an idiot. That's a low bar. It was a good bar for that conversation. She looked at him sideways. He wants to call you. Kang-hyun was quiet for a moment. To assess me. To assess you, she confirmed. Should I be worried? Deshaun is 42 and does not look like someone who should be underestimated. Helpful. You've handled worse. He looked at the city. Then set it up. She nodded. She looked at the pendant at her throat, which she touched occasionally without meaning to, the way you touch something you've gotten used to carrying. She'd worn it every day since Christmas. It had become part of how she understood herself in the mirror in the mornings, not a dramatic part, not a statement. Just there, like the ring she'd worn for 34 years, that she'd moved to her right hand after Malcolm died, which was still there too. Both there, alongside each other, not competing. I was wrong about something, she said. What? She thought about how to say it. She'd been working on the words since February, since the Tuesday morning she'd woken up in the spare room at Naomi's and realized she'd dreamed about Malcolm and Kang-hyun in the same dream. Sound like green figures, but as two distinct and separate weights that she was carrying in different ways, in different parts of herself, and neither one was displacing the other. And she'd woken up knowing that this was not a problem, but the answer to one. I thought that loving Malcolm completely meant I couldn't do it again, she said. Not differently, or smaller, or anything like that. I thought the completeness of it was what made it impossible to repeat. She looked at her hands. Like there was a finite amount of it, and I'd spent it all, and I was living off the savings. She looked at him. I was wrong about that. Kang-hyun waited. It doesn't work like money, she said. It works like what I told Naomi about hard things. The design. She shook her head slightly. It just makes more. If you let it. If you stop treating it like a resource that runs out and start treating it like a thing that grows when you use it. He was quiet for a long time. I've spent 15 years not using it, he said. I know. She looked at him. You should probably know that I have opinions about that. Suspected. The corner of his mouth moved. What are your opinions? That 15 years was too long. She held his gaze. And that you're going to have to work at not doing it again. At not pulling back into the boardroom version of yourself when things get hard. Because they will get hard. That's just what things do. He looked at her. I know that. And when they do, I'm not going to let you manage me at a professional distance. She said it plainly, without heat. Just the clear enunciation of a fact. I'll make that very uncomfortable for you. His expression moved through something she recognized as the beginning of genuine amusement. I believe you. Good. She looked at the city. The lights and the late traffic and the somewhere out there enormity of Seoul, which had been a foreign planet to her 4 months ago, and was now a place that had her daughter's apartment and her grandson's son, and a small restaurant with 8 tables, and a cast iron pot she'd held in both hands in a dark kitchen on a night that now felt like someone else's story except that it wasn't. She reached over and took his hand. He didn't make anything of it. He just closed his fingers around hers and looked at the city with her, and they sat there like 2 people who had arrived at a place. Neither of them had planned to reach and had decided, both of them, that it was where they were going to be. She thought about the bus stop, the cold, the handkerchief. She thought about Malcolm, who had made her laugh on their first date, and apologized for it, which was so exactly Malcolm that she'd fallen a little in love with him. In that moment, the man who apologized for making her laugh, who was embarrassed by his own charm. She thought about 34 years and 3 children and 2 cars that kept breaking, and the kitchen they'd renovated twice and never gotten completely right, and the way his voice had sounded saying her name, which was a sound she would carry in the specific register of it for the rest of her life. She thought about the rest of her life. This was the thing she hadn't been able to think about directly since he died. Not in a forward direction. She could look back. She could look sideways at the present. But forward, whatever was left ahead, had been a direction she'd been avoiding, because the only life she'd planned to have had ended in a hospital on a Tuesday afternoon, 18 months after she'd turned 58. And she hadn't gotten around to planning another one. She was planning one now. It had a table that was too small, and a grandson who banged spoons, and a daughter who organized dishes with military precision, and a young man who brought more galbi than anyone requested, because the alternative was bringing too little, and he was. Not a man who did things halfway once he'd decided to do them. It had a city she was learning, a language she was getting less bad at. A man sitting next to her whose hands were not steady when he put a necklace on her and who had given up an empire rather than allow his past to destroy their future, which was not a small thing, which was in fact one of the larger things she'd ever witnessed. She felt the pendant against her skin. Stay. The city breathed below them. Seoul in spring, indifferent and brilliant, containing everything. Imani Whitaker, 60 years old, widow, grandmother, woman who had cried at a bus stop in November and had not expected what followed, sat in the cold with her hand in someone's hand and understood, fully and without reservation, that she had already made her choice. She was staying. She was already home.